Good evening, everyone. Yeah, I was just waiting for the music to go down a bit. And I'm so happy to be the first one to speak this evening. I promise you, I haven't finished my glass of wine, so I'm going to be really great. But good evening, my name is Innocent Grant, and I'm from Tanzania. And in Tanzania, when we want to say good evening, we say habari ya jioni. So when I say habari ya jioni, you all can respond salama, which is easy. Salama means safe, salama means good, salama means fresh. So habari ya jioni. Thank you. Again, my name is Innocent Grant, and I'm truly so happy to be with all of you tonight. And I just arrived in the United States from Tanzania a few weeks ago, and I'm pursuing my master's degree at the Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health. Now, even though I'm very far away from home this evening, but tonight I feel like I'm really home, and I'm very happy to connect with everyone. So before I begin, I want to tell you a story, and that I've spoken many times before as well, which is the same story I've met, and it changed a lot to myself and to the work that I'm doing. And this is a story of my friend Latifa, who is from Tanzania, who I met as she participated in one of our programs we did in Tanzania called Young Mothers for Community Health Project. Latifa belongs to a young mothers group of youth who were dropped from school due to teenage pregnancy in a time when in Tanzania we had a presidential statement that banned pregnant schoolgirls from staying in school. And this is just a day when the president waked up and said, I don't want pregnant schoolgirls to go back to school. It was really hard. Now, many who were banned from school are today young mothers. In Latifa's group, they have no choice, but they do, what they do is they do sex to earn money, which they call it commercial sex, to feed their babies and their poor families. As you can see, when they're young mothers, they've been kicked out of school. They have a double burden. They have a burden of no qualification to gain a good job, but at the same time, they have a kid support. And in Tanzania, laws say someone who gives a girl pregnant, schoolgirl pregnant, they're being taken to jail for 5 years. So that supporting father is also in jail for 5 years. In the commercial sex work that they do, it's unsafe, but at the same time, they earn less than $1 per day because where they work is quite in a poor neighborhood. They have poor motherhood skills, exposing their children to other issues such as poor nutrition. Now, as we know, when you don't have good feeding for your babies or your kids, eventually there is no any good brain development to learn good skills. And at the same time, not enough skills to compete and innovate in such a fast-moving world. And a big risk to fall in the same poverty cycle for their children who they're taking care of. Now, it was just an impact of the president's declaration, and this impact of his words have exposed an average of 8,000 girls being banned and dropped from school each year and facing this terrible injustice that Latifa falls in. Now, I said 8,000 girls who are young mothers, but let's think about 8,000 men as well. Some of them are in jail, and some of them are actually young fathers. They are not just informed about sexual and reproductive health and being protected. So I want us to look on the both sides as well. Now, the reality like these are why I've dedicated my energy and efforts to fight for sexual and reproductive health and rights in Tanzania, especially for the health and rights of young people like Latifa. PAI, as we all know, Population Action International, has stood with my organization and my colleagues at my organization called Young and Alive Initiative for many years, and has supported the advocacy and the accountability work that we do in the country. Just as PAI has stood with Young and Alive, each of you stands with PAI, and as a result, you with me and my friend Latifa and her group and their children, my community in Tanzania, and our entire global movement. I know that this evening you all are fighting for reproductive rights in the United States and all around the world. And on behalf of Latifa, myself, and my community and everyone, I want to say thank you. In my local language, Swahili, we say asante sana. So asante sana to everyone for the work that we do. Now, I know we have so much left to do this evening, but I remember when we received the news that the law was overturned in the United States, it was shocking that this could happen here in the United States. We are very worried about what this message would be for other countries. You can just hear about such a presidential declaration which had made a huge difference and exposing a lot of people to risk. But because it does matter what happens in the United States, and your example here influence others. In my beautiful country, Tanzania, we face our own challenges. You can recall from Latifa's story that I shared before. We also have to deal with stigma associated with reproductive health services like contraceptive access for youth and unmarried people, and misinformation and myths that make my community vulnerable. And even though we have these challenges, but to myself, I think I also have hope. I have hope because at Young and Alive, my organization in Tanzania, we speak up and work together to mobilize the power of young people. For example, our recent partnership with PAI has led to young people sitting together to challenge comprehensive councils of health plans so that they can include responsive reproductive health plans within those comprehensive councils. We call them CCHPs, and that's my team on the screen. Oh, it just passed by. I'm sorry you missed it. I hope it will come again next time. But it is an example that young people can't be stopped when we join arm in arm and fight for the right things. So I have hope because I've seen what happens to communities when health, rights, and autonomy are respected. Communities are healthier and stronger that way. That's my team again. That's a team in Tanzania, and they're doing an amazing work. Now, I hope because none of us is alone, and I'm thankful to be able to do an important work alongside PAI and honorable leaders here in the United States that support our movement. You will hear more from some of these leaders tonight, but first I want to introduce my very best sister, Nabeeha Kazi Hutchins. As you all may know her, she's the president and CEO of PAI and was with us in Tanzania back in May. My sister Nabeeha and I visited Latifa, the one who I shared her story before, and we were reminded of the positive impacts that our common efforts yield and the challenges that no one can ignore if we really believe that women and young people should achieve their full potential on their own terms. And one of the things we can never ignore is the fundamental right to sexual and reproductive health. I know we will keep going forward together because the lives and well-being of the people are actually at stake. Now, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts, and please join me in welcoming my sister Nabeeha. Asanteni sana.
Asante sana.
Thank you.
Thank you, Innocent. Give it up for Innocent again. Asante sana. Innocent, what you and your team at Young and Alive are fighting for and achieving in Tanzania is powerful. And it's a powerful reason why our shared advocacy and accountability and our mandate, why all of that matters so much. You inspire us at every turn, and I'm so proud of our partnership, of our friendship, and that you count me as your sister and I count you as my brother. And it's long lasting and over the years. I'm also so glad that all of you are here, and I'm so thrilled that we could be together in this beautiful space. Thank you all for coming, and a very special thank you to Nelson Mullins, who gave us this space to host this wonderful event today. Each of you is essential to our movement as we champion choice and fight for the sexual and reproductive health and rights for all people. Your voice, your courage, and your commitment are unwavering. And in this time, when attacks on bodily autonomy, identity, sexual and reproductive health care, and more come at us from all sides, we need you and we need each other more than ever before. I have the great honor of leading PAI. It's an organization I love so dearly. And it is also a community that I am so proud to be a part of. For 59 years, we have advocated to Congress, held our government and international institutions accountable, amplified data and evidence for better informed policies, laws, and programs, and we've shared funding, knowledge, and space with local organizations in more than 30 countries so that they can advance sexual and reproductive health and rights for their own communities on their own terms. Every day, PAI speaks truth to power and works to fuel and foster a people-led movement for rights, health, and dignity. The US is the largest funder of global health, and as a result, the US is also the largest funder for reproductive health. Many in this room rely on the leadership of the US and our example. And when our leadership or when the decisions that we make have a negative impact on communities because of policies or funding or rhetoric, we also have to say that it has an impact abroad, and this is oftentimes misaligned with what the majority of Americans actually want. Because what the majority of Americans want for themselves and for communities around the world is that the right for sexual and reproductive health care be guaranteed and be available to all people. Many in this room are able to do the urgent work that your missions mandate because of the power of a watchful eye, an unhindered voice, and a global community that stands together. From fighting against gender-based violence and delivering contraceptives and family planning programs, to combating anti-abortion efforts and providing support to governments for improved health delivery, to funding our movement, and so much more. Each of you does your part in essential ways. And you also enable PAI to demand that global sexual and reproductive health not only be a funding and policy priority of the US government and international institutions, but that it's also recognized as central to the realization of our values and ambitions for gender equality, human rights, justice, and opportunity for all people. With us tonight are going to be two bold champions in Congress who have fought for sexual and reproductive health and rights both here at home and also around the world. For them, this is not just a policy agenda to advance or a foreign aid budget line item to defend. For them, this is about humanity and who we are and who we should be in the world and with each other. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, such a beloved and dedicated champion and friend to our movement, represents California's 12th congressional district. And when she speaks up for all of us. She is a prominent leader in the fight for reproductive rights and has served in the US House of Representatives since 1998. Representative Lee has consistently championed issues related to social justice, civil rights, and women's rights. She also has ensured that the US remain a strong ally in advancing access to comprehensive reproductive health care for women and youth around the world. She sponsors the Global Health, Empowerment, and Rights Act, which is known as the Global HER Act, and that aims to permanently repeal the harmful global gag rule, which I hope that we will get to talk a little bit more with her about that tonight. This legislation ensures that global health organizations that receive US funding can provide the comprehensive reproductive health care, including access to safe abortions that people want and need and on their terms. She's also author of the Each Woman Act, which would repeal the discriminatory Hyde Amendment that has restricted many women's access to reproductive health care. Congresswoman Lee has pushed for legislation that would restore Roe, increase access to contraception and medication abortion, and ensure robust funding so that every individual can decide when, if, and how to become pregnant. Her leadership in the Congressional Pro-Choice Caucus and her unwavering commitment to women's reproductive health over the decades has saved lives around the world. And while there's so much to celebrate and be hopeful for, tonight is also bittersweet for us because we know that Congresswoman Lee will be departing Congress. This will no doubt leave a void, but her legacy of advocacy, human rights, reproductive justice, and peace will endure. And among those who carry her legacy forward is another inspiring champion of choice and rights who also will be joining us a little bit later today. That's Congresswoman Sara Jacobs, a leader who is carrying forward the baton of change. Her work in Congress has been instrumental in advocating for policies that promote gender equality, reproductive health, and youth empowerment, both domestically and abroad. Congresswoman Sara Jacobs is in her second term in Congress and proudly serves California's 51st district. She's a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, In the House Democratic Caucus, she serves as the caucus leadership representative and is also the youngest member of Democratic House leadership. Congresswoman Jacobs, and she's on the screen right there, also serves as founding co-chair of the Protection of Civilians in Conflict Caucus and vice chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus. Last year, Congresswoman Jacobs introduced the My Body, My Data Act, and it was in response to surveillance of those who are providing or seeking reproductive care, including those who cross state lines to seek care. The act would create a new national standard to protect reproductive and sexual health data and could serve also as a positive example to other countries that are navigating similar risks and similar threats. Prior to serving to elected office, Congresswoman Jacobs spent years working to address, minimize, and prevent conflict, instability, and inequality around the world. She worked in the State Department, in the Department of Peacekeeping Operations at the UN. She's also worked at UNICEF. She worked for the US State Department and also served as foreign policy advisor to Secretary Clinton during Secretary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Congresswoman Jacobs' leadership is grounded in her firsthand global experience. The fact that she brings that perspective to Congress gives us all the reassurance that in her, we have a leader who knows the sexual and reproductive health and rights, who also knows that these rights are human rights, and that when those rights are respected, supported, and propelled, both here at home and abroad, communities thrive, communities are better. You'll remember that the invitation also included Congresswoman Meng. She unfortunately is unable to join us tonight, but we appreciate all that she is advancing and stewarding for our movement in the halls of Congress and beyond. So both Representative Lee and Representative Jacobs are doing their jobs. They're currently in Congress voting on a range of items, including a continuing resolution, and will hopefully join us. We've been told they will be joining us, but maybe a little delayed. So while we wait, I do want to invite a special guest, and who is a friend of PAI and a friend of our movement to the stage, Rachel Moynihan. Rachel serves, yes, why not? She deserves it. Rachel serves as Deputy Director of the North American Representational Office of UNFPA. UNFPA is the UN's Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. One of the impact areas of our congressional champions, as well as PAI's own advocacy, is to ensure that funding for UNFPA is sustained and that the role of UNFPA is understood and valued. And why? So that UNFPA can deliver reproductive health services globally to ensure that the right to sexual and reproductive health care is accessible to communities who desire them. Rachel, please join me on stage so we can learn more about UNFPA and why your work matters. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Nabeeha.
Thank
How
you
are
for
you?
joining.
And my apologies to the audience. I have on good intel that Representative Lee is on her way, so I will gladly cede the floor to her when she is here, and appreciate your grace in hearing from me first.
We might have a little too much fun because we are also fast friends, and every time Rachel and I visit, I'm just inspired by so many new ideas and so many things that we could be doing. So I'll try and stay on script, and we'll have a lot of time at the end of this to continue our visit. So first of all, tell me a little bit about what UNFPA does and what impact does Congress have on your ability to advance your mandate?
Well, thanks so much, Nabeeha. Thanks for everyone for being here, and thank you to PAI. I can't express how invaluable the work is that you do, that your colleagues do in the halls of Congress and just in the advocacy community overall. We really, really appreciate it from UNFPA. I'm going to show my American flag and yes. UN flag pin. UNFPA is the UN Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency. We work in about 150 countries to provide, to meet the unmet need for family planning. We work to prevent preventable maternal deaths, and we also work to end all forms of gender-based violence, including things like child marriage and FGM. Sunshine, I see you're here. And we do that by working with governments, by working with local organizations, and with faith leaders to deliver a variety of contraception and maternal health care, and also maternal health care in conflict settings. Very important, especially in humanitarian settings. And I have to acknowledge a lot of our US government friends who are here and appreciate the great support that the U.S. entrusts us with right now.
Great.
On the Congress piece?
Yeah.
Congress can do a lot. Congress authorizes and appropriates funding to UNFPA directly and also to humanitarian and bilateral accounts that keep this work going. It's some of the best sort of investment for your money, and it's one of the sort of uniquely targeted accounts that has remained either flat or decreasing in funding while other accounts have grown over the past couple of years. So Congress can do a lot to be helpful and also sometimes to be hurtful.
Is the U.S. giving its fair share to UNFPA?
The U.S. is giving an unprecedented amount of money to UNFPA. We are so grateful for that, for the level of support that they are giving. The money that goes to UNFPA is able to empower organizations that are working on the ground that we really depend on in countries to do things like end FGM and to meet the unmet need for family planning and also the critical need in humanitarian settings, especially in places like Afghanistan. Fair share is a tough calculation. I don't want to go into it because that's Craig's territory, but the U.S. of course could always be doing more. There's a lot of need out there, but we're really grateful for what we receive.
And that's a really important point, right? Because we have so many other conflicting, I wouldn't say conflicting priorities. We have so many priorities and so many emergent needs and current needs that the fact that we can retain that funding is an achievement and important. And also, I would say, a success of advocates and those who are doing the hard work to make the case for UNFPA, which of course includes you in your role. But there is a reality of this ping pong effect in support of UNFPA and other UN agencies. So we've had funding come and go, and also policies that affect your ability to continue the work or at least implement the work in its full capacity. So what effect does this ping pong effect actually have on the lives of people? Not necessarily just on the institution that is UNFPA and your ability to deliver care, but what does it do for the communities that you are in service to?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's devastating because while funding can be replaced, and hopefully that, you know, if that day would come again that where the U.S. decides to pull all funding from UNFPA, that technical capacity that the U.S. Has around the world is, you cannot replicate that in any other way. And so people feel on the technical level sometimes scared or reticent to even share like data sets with each other. And that's devastating. It's inefficient. And when UNFPA and USAID are working on the ground in the same place and feel too nervous to be in the same room with each other, that is devastating and wildly inefficient. And it sends a message about UNFPA's work that maternal health, sexual and reproductive health, and gender-based violence work is no longer important. And that's very tough to dissuade people from.
Rachel, what else should we be doing as advocates and also those who are not sitting here close to Congress? What is the role and responsibility of American taxpayers, of young people, of those who care about this issue but are not embedded in it every single day? How do we bring more into this tent?
So I'll answer in two ways. It's a great question. When you look at the news and you see what's going on, we like to describe our mandate as often the first featured and the last funded. When you look at coverage of the crisis in Gaza or Afghanistan, Ukraine, a flood, the most compelling from a human perspective is seeing a pregnant woman fleeing or a baby safely rescued from the rubble, or the devastating story of girls in Afghanistan being, beaten within an inch of their life for attempting to go to school. That is devastating. And so staying informed in those real heartstring moments, like keeping yourself informed of what's going on, but then also holding, if that's something that you care about and impacts you, ask your member, how are you actually then going about funding that and supporting that work? Because that's the heart and soul of what UNFPA and so many others in this room do, including PAI. Work that we do is such a pittance. It's fractions of a penny of the larger sort of accounts that we're dealing with. And they're some of the best, most valuable investments you can possibly make. And they are generational changes in a community. Innocent earlier was describing how girls are being punished by being removed from school in Tanzania because they're pregnant. And I just can't think of anything more devastating to a young girl than to be told that she's no longer, her educational life is essentially over just because she is pregnant. And so if that's something that you care about and you want to remain, and you want it to remain funded, tell your member about it.
And again, these are interests that are shared across the country. And your point on how this affects people and their lives, regardless of what the crisis is, what is acutely affected are people's ability to access sexual and reproductive health. I think about my birth country of Pakistan when we had the flood a few years ago, and actually the province that I was born, there were 600,000 people who were pregnant who no longer had services. And during that time, other unintended pregnancies were increasing, gender-based violence went through the roof. And we talk about what happened in Pakistan and other countries as a climate crisis, and it was a climate crisis, and it was a humanitarian crisis, but it was also a rights crisis. And we have to remember that. And Carl's gonna laugh at me because the great state of Kansas is about to enter the conversation. Yes. When I mentioned in my remarks, and it is my great state of Kansas, when I mentioned in my remarks the preference of the people of the United States, we have to remember that the first state that put abortion on the ballot, the state constitutional right for abortion to be removed or to be protected after Roe was reversed, was Kansas, and the majority of Kansans voted to protect that right. So we have to remember that as Americans here who are voting and advocating, we do believe in those freedoms and that right, and we just have to carry that voice forward. Rachel, thank you so much.
Thank you. The woman of the hour is here.
Yes, she is.
We're so delighted to have Barbara Lee here.
Congresswoman Lee, it is so wonderful to have you here.
Well, I am very happy to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me, but thank you all for the work that you're doing each and every day.
Well, we can't do it without your voice, and I know that you have many commitments, and it means so much for you to stop by, especially given the important work also that's happening in Congress. You had to do that job first, and that you made space for us, and it really means a lot because all of us in this room are fans and supporters of yours and of your leadership. And I do want to thank you. It's a profound honor for all of us to be able to share this space with you tonight. I want to thank you for improving and saving lives around the world and for bringing justice to so many people. You've had a profound impact on the lives of millions of people, and you weren't able to see Innocent, but Innocent Grant, he's joining us from Tanzania. He's a fierce youth advocate who's fighting for sexual and reproductive health and rights, and of course, the support of the US government, much of course that you are advocating for, makes a difference in Tanzania as it does around the world. You've been a steadfast voice for us, whether that's in Congress or meeting with world leaders or even standing side by side with grassroots advocates. You've never wavered in your belief that sexual and reproductive health and rights are fundamental human rights. And I have two quick questions for you. The first is, as we reflect on your leadership and your contributions, and of course honor your legacy, can you share a few words of advice for us and what this journey for us is about as we carry this work forward?
Well, first, let me just say PAI has been such a part of my life. I have no option, let me tell you. Sexual and reproductive health rights, these are basic human rights. And in fact, as a woman and as an African American woman, are we okay? As an African American woman, I have no option. It's important, and let me thank you all for the CODEL that I went on. I was just talking about, I know I was on a PAI CODEL, and it was very impactful. I don't remember which countries we went to, but making sure that staff and members of Congress get out there and just see the impact of the work that you're doing, but also of the work that we must continue to do is just extremely important. Just a couple of stories. One, my mother needed a C-section, and this tells you, I just want you to know why for myself. She needed a C-section, went to the hospital, and they would not admit her because she was Black. My mother finally got in as a result of my grandmother fighting and telling the people that she was her daughter. Now, in the Black community, of course, we have the history of enslaved women being raped by their slave master, right? Mm-hmm. And so my grandmother's father was Irish, because my great-grandmother had been a domestic worker in an Irish household, and out of that there was a rape, and 2 children were born. One was my grandmother. So my grandmother looked like she was white, bottom line. So that's how my mother got into the hospital. But once she was in the hospital, they would not provide any medical care at all. They just left her in the hall on a, quote, gurney. Now I was born in El Paso, Texas. Everyone knows that story. And someone finally saw her and didn't know what to do because she was delirious. She was very near death. And someone pulled her into the emergency room. They did not take her to the operating room because she was so close to death. She became unconscious. And bottom line, they did not know what to do because she was dying. And they knew this baby was gonna die in childbirth. So what happened was they ended up delivering this baby by forceps, and that baby was me. Mm. And I had a scar above my eye until very recently from the forceps delivery. Mm. Now I share that story with you because some people want to know how I got so involved in women's health and reproductive rights and reproductive freedom. I have no option because I almost didn't get here into this world, and my mother almost died during childbirth. So from day one, this has been my life. And from day one, as a child, I said, I'm going to do something about making sure that Black women, especially, don't have to go through what my mommy went through. And so that's sort of the context. So fast forward, what you all are doing is extremely important because you give me a lot of hope that the global gag rule is going to be repealed, that we're going to pass the HER Act, that we're going to end the Hyde Amendment, and that we're going to make sure that reproductive freedom and maternal child care and maternal mortality rates here in our own country and throughout the world are dealt with, because we still have many of the same issues as it relates to women's health, especially women of color, poor women, Black women, that we had when I was born. And so what PAI is doing is you all are moving forward and making sure that this world becomes a better place for women and girls and families than it was in the day. And so we're at that critical turning point. And I just have to say, elections matter. And so we have to do what we have to do November 5th. And so this gives me a lot of hope being here with you and knowing your history and being part of this whole effort from day one, that we just have to move forward. And believe me, I'm not retiring, I'm forging ahead with you.
Well, we know that you're going to continue to stand with us no matter what. We shared your tremendous leadership earlier with everyone in the room, and I do want to be respectful of your time. But I'd love for you to give us some words of advice, and we do have a special recognition for you as well. But would love your advice as we carry this work forward with you. You may not be in Congress, which is very bittersweet for us, but we're going to do this with you. So what do we need to do to keep going?
Well, to keep going, what we need to do is to keep going, first, and we need to keep going. And we can't get weary. We can't get tired, because this is a movement, and this is what it is. It's a movement to protect our democracy and the world's movement for freedom to make decisions about our own bodies, whether we're here in America or abroad. And forming allies, alliances, coalitions, broaden our coalition. When I really got very involved in the then pro-choice movement, there were very few women of color involved, because the pro-choice movement did not understand the intersection between race and poverty and gender. And so I fought really hard. And now, as co-chair of the pro-choice caucus, I think you've seen a huge shift, where now women of color, Black women and white women and Native women and Latinas and AAPI women are all working together. And I think that's going to be very critical for the future. And so we have to stay the course and make sure that these alliances and allies are not divided by, those others who want us divided. Also, I led the effort on the Global AIDS Initiative, PEPFAR, the Global Fund. We have to, moving forward, continue to fight for a 5-year clean bill to extend it for 5 years, because we've got to get to an AIDS-free generation by 2030.
Absolutely.
That's our goal. And there's some in Congress who are trying to undermine the bipartisan efforts that we have maintained for the last 20-some years, starting with George Bush and Barbara Lee, to get to this point. So and I'll be fighting hard on the outside to get that 5-year extension. And then also just making sure that all of these barriers to reproductive health care, to sexual and reproductive health, and to women's health, and to what is taking place, especially in developing countries, that all those barriers are eliminated. In our country, the United States needs to be leading in that effort, not putting up obstacles. So we have a lot of work to do, but I just want to tell you, we've come a long way, and I've seen how far we've come when I go abroad and go into the villages all over the world. And PAI has been such a part of that, and so just stay the course, and I'll be right there with you on a lot of fronts, making sure that finally justice for women is done, and that's what we have to stay focused on.
Thank you so much. And justice for women, we will keep that fight going, and we know that you're going to do it alongside.
And let me just acknowledge,
yes.
I think Sara is she here, Congresswoman Jacobs, because she is, I've been abroad with her, and she is a woman who is going to be here, and she's going to be leading so many of these fights, and she has just, how many terms? It seems like you've been here 5 or 6 terms now, second term. So Sara and some of the women who have come to Congress recently, you all really need to understand, they hit the ground running. They didn't have to go through what I had to go through by trying to educate Democrats why we needed, say, to end the Hyde Amendment. So I just wanted you to know that I feel really confident that we're in great hands.
Well, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. Also, on behalf of PAI's Board of Directors and our incredible team, we want to recognize you tonight with the PAI Catalyst Award for lifelong service, for championing our movement, and for standing with us in solidarity every step of the way.
Oh boy, thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you for everything you've done.
Thank you all.
Oh, we're gonna do a quick question. Congresswoman Jacobs? Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do a picture.
And your colors.
I know, and our matching
look
colors. We did this on purpose.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Lee.
Okay.
I'm so happy you're here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Well, welcome, Congresswoman Jacobs, Sara Jacobs, everyone. Yeah. So I want to make sure we've got the right mic for Congresswoman Jacobs. Can everyone hear us okay? Yeah. How was Congress? You're coming straight from some votes?
Yes, we're coming straight from the floor. There was a continuing resolution on the floor tonight. The Republicans did not pass it. So that's Congress right now.
Well, thank you for making it here and being with us. We talked about your background and your leadership, all that you stand for, all that you're fighting for earlier, and just really appreciate you making time for us and being in this space with fellow champions for choice. We're so pleased that you're here. We appreciate your hard work in Congress tonight, but always. And also, as I said, thankful for your leadership. And very curious about your own experience and your own perspective. They're making an important difference in Congress, and curious to share a little bit about why sexual and reproductive health and rights is so important to you, why you carry this mantle forward. Why do you care?
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for having me and for everything that you do. And I feel so grateful to organizations like yours, people like Barbara Lee, who have been fighting this fight for so long, because I already feel a little tired of explaining these things to people, so I can only imagine how the rest of you are feeling. But look, the fact of the matter is, as a young woman, right, these things we're talking about are part of my everyday life. And that's why it's so important to me, like I know it is for all of you and for everyone across this country, right? Like, when we're talking about reproductive health, like that's literally my healthcare. I mean, sorry, Mom, but in my 20s, I literally only went to the OBGYN. I didn't have time for any other doctor. And when I realized how much of the things I was talking about with my peers and my friends on a daily basis that just was totally absent from the conversation in Congress, it made me realize just how much more educating we need to do, right? So, like, I froze my eggs in my first term in Congress. That was a lot of educating I had to do to explain to my colleagues what that was. Meanwhile, like, I'm a 35-year-old woman. That's basically all my friends and I talk about. It's like, who's freezing their eggs, who's having kids, who wants to have kids, who doesn't want to have kids. And I remember exactly, like I'm sure all of you do, exactly where I was when the Dobbs decision came down. I was actually in a meeting at the DCCC talking about how we were going to help our candidates talk about abortion rights on the campaign trail. And then the decision came down. And I started like physically shaking. And all of a sudden, later that week, my phone was going crazy with friends and peers and constituents reaching out, asking if they should delete their period tracking apps. And so my team and I started looking into it, and turns out there is no federal protections for your reproductive and sexual health data. And so we introduced a bill, the My Body, My Data Act. Then I had to explain to my colleagues what this bill would do. And first, I had to explain, yes, people track their periods for many reasons. It's very helpful to know when not to wear white pants, for instance, or many other reasons. And two, there are now apps that help you do that. And here's how that data is being used. And here's why it's important that Congress does something about that. Now, as part of that, I became the first person, we think in congressional history, although we know at least for the last 35 years, to ever talk about my own period on the House floor. So, so much history in my first term, yes. But to me, just like Barbara was saying, like, these are things that we're dealing with all the time that are part of our lives. And the fact of the matter is they need to be things we're talking about in Congress, because if we're not talking about them, we're certainly not making good policy about them.
Yes. And that is exactly what we are also advancing around the world, that we've got to speak up, we have to use the words, we have to destigmatize, and we have to make sure that as communities are demanding their rights, that they're able to achieve them in a way that's safe and that's recognized and that's celebrated. So thank you for everything that you're doing. You're one of the first millennial to be represented in Congress, and you're one of the youngest members of Congress. This generation of young people is the largest generation in history. So power with the youth. They not only carry passion and perspectives, but they also will be impacted by the failures, but also the achievements of our times. What do you see as your responsibility to your own generation, but also to the generations that will come after you, as it pertains to reproductive rights, to agency, to autonomy, and all the things that will enable their full achievement?
So officially, I'm the 5th youngest member of Congress, but I reject this because there's actually only one member of Congress who's actually younger than me, Maxwell Frost. And then 4 of us were all born in 1989. My birthday just comes first. So I say I'm tied for second. I have a 2.5-year-old niece, so she agrees with me on my logic. But look, I think our generations, millennials, Gen Z, we have come of age in a time when it really has felt like we've had to figure out the answers for ourselves, right? Like, I graduated college in the midst of the Great Recession. Gen Z is graduating in the midst of COVID. We've never known a day in our adult lives when the United States hasn't been at war. We've had to deal with school shootings, and we've had to deal with climate change. And until very recently, we didn't really see government doing anything about that. And then all of a sudden, bam, we now have less rights than our parents and grandparents did. And that's really scary. It's also, I think, so inspiring to see how millennials and Gen Z have taken that and, instead of opting out, have made their voices heard and have been registering to vote in record numbers, have been getting involved in record numbers. Now, we're still very underrepresented in Congress. I think we should have like 50 millennials in Congress if we were adequately represented, and I think we're now up to like 13, so we're getting there. We're still only at 23% women, so we got a lot of work to do in congressional representation in general. But to me, it's about making sure not only do we recognize that we need to get these rights back, but also to recognize that, to be honest, for a lot of people, the rights we had really weren't enough, right? Roe needs to be the floor. Because if you're a young person living in Texas, you really didn't have access to abortion well before the Dobbs decision. And if you are living in these countries around the world, even if they don't have laws against abortion access, you probably have a really hard time actually accessing it. And so, to me, it's about recognizing that this post-Roe moment is very different than the pre-Roe moment. And we have an opportunity to actually think about things differently, to make sure we're addressing reproductive health data, which was not a thing pre-Roe because they didn't have this surveillance infrastructure that we now have, to make sure we're really taking the access part as seriously as we're taking the rights part. Because for a long time, I think, as Barbara was saying, we kind of didn't realize that they actually had to go together in the movement. And so, to me, it's about thinking about how do we look at this moment and the fact that we have now catalyzed attention to something. I mean, I'll tell you, I was, a while ago, pre-Dobbs, a Democratic male political figure, literally in their stump speech would say things like, we need to focus on the things that actually matter to people, like infrastructure and healthcare, not things that are divisive like abortion. Like, abortion is healthcare. So we have this moment, right, where people are finally focused on this issue, are finally realizing that, like, we weren't being hysterical. They really did want to take our rights away. And now, how do we use that energy to actually get to an even better place in the future? And I think that's the way I think about it right now, which is that it's not enough to just go back. We're not going back. We're not going back to 2020, but we're also not going back to 1980, right? Like, what does it mean to actually take this moment and move forward? And what do we do to make sure people actually have access and rights to the full range of reproductive care, whether that's abortion, whether that's assisted reproductive technology, whether that's all these different areas of justice, of reproductive justice, and how do we make sure we're moving in that direction?
Speaking of moving forward, We know that there are ongoing budget and policy battles in Congress for reproductive health, for global health, all issues, of course, you care for and you advocate for, as we do. Um, we've seen this for the past fiscal years. We're expecting it to be another fight for the 2025 fiscal year. What do you think we need to prioritize for this next Congress? And what specifically are you going to be fighting for?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So right now, like, we just got to stop the bad things, right? We're in the minority in the House, like, we're playing defense. But hopefully, after November, we'll get to play offense again. And then I think there's a really important role in recognizing how all of these things go together and also bridging the domestic international divide. And I think that's a really important space that you all can play, which is that when we're talking about codifying Roe, we also need to be talking about getting rid of the global gag rule for good, right? It's not one or the other. It's about how do we have a package of things that we move forward together that actually does all the things we know need to be doing, hopefully when we have the ability to actually do it. I'm knocking on all the wood here. And so I think it's about, one, between now and November 5th, making sure we're actually getting everyone to vote and making sure that we're helping people understand the real stakes of the election. And look, and that's true at the presidential level, but it's also true all the way down. This is something for those of you who live in like bluer places like California, where I represent, that's where the House majority is running through. The House majority is running through California, it's running through New York. And sometimes folks get this feeling when they live in California or New York, I know as a Californian, that we're protected. They can do whatever crazy things they want in DC. We live in California, we'll be okay. It's mostly true. Except on this issue, because if there's a federal abortion ban, we will not be okay in California. It doesn't matter which state you live in. And so making sure that we're not only looking at the presidential, as important as that is, but really understanding that if we don't have partners in the Senate who are willing to do this, if we don't have a House that is pro-choice, we're not going to be able to get any of this done. And so it's about making sure everyone really understands the stakes of this election and the stakes of all of the pieces of this election.
Let's talk a little bit about youth, and specifically US-based youth. How do we engage more young people in this fight to get them to understand the issues, to give them opportunities to engage, and also that their voice and their perspective is respected and acted upon?
So I've been traveling across the country to college campuses talking to young people. And it's really great because in Congress, I'm really young. Then I get to a college campus and they're like, wow, you're old. And I'm like, I know.
You should hear what they say to me.
Like my side part, my skinny jeans, I can't help it. I am who I am. But look, I think a big piece of it is that young people do understand. Like, let's be clear, they are making their voices heard. And I think it's less about us trying to educate them about the stakes. They know. It's their rights that are being taken away. And how do we do a better job? And more about how do we do a better job of listening to them and listening to what they're telling us. It's so funny because, people are always coming up to me being like, young people don't care about anything. How do we get them involved? And then 10 seconds later being like, can you believe young people are like protesting this thing now? I'm like, so do you want them to care or do you not want them to care? Because like you can't have both. Like young people care right now. They are involved, they are engaged. Now it's just about how we listen to them. And then, and this is the key, how we actually show them that we are getting things done, right? So when I'm talking to young people, a lot of what I'm doing is not berating them or educating them, right? It's saying, actually, when young people made their voices heard about climate change, Congress was able to pass the first investment in climate change ever. When young people made their voices heard on gun violence, we passed the first gun violence prevention legislation since I was in elementary school. Now, we have a lot more work to do, and we're all clear about what that is, but it is actually possible to make change if you make your voice heard. And then when young people win us this election, we have to actually do the things they told us and that we told them we were going to do and that they told us they wanted, right? And so if we win this election and then in 2025 don't codify Roe, if we are able to, that will be a big problem, right? Because we are then reinforcing the idea that your voice actually doesn't matter, right? And so we need to be listening to them and getting them involved and then actually delivering on the promises that we've made and rebuilding that cycle of trust. Because it's that two-piece thing, right? They, one, think no one cares what they think, and two is like, well, nothing's going to change anyways. And like, yes, we care. And yes, when you make your voice heard and you come out to vote and you talk to your representatives and you protest, we can actually get things done, as we have been able to do on some of these issues, and as we know there's much more work to do.
And this is really tough stuff, right? So you've talked about how you have to case make for just the fundamentals. There's so much awareness and education that is also required, and at the same time keeping a watchful eye on policy language and budget allocations. It's a lot. And we also have the backdrop of so many attacks on our rights across the board, both here and abroad. What gives you hope? And what's your charge to us, to all of us, so we can carry that work forward?
What gives me hope is that what we've seen is that when our rights got taken away, it wasn't that people decided like, I guess this is it then, right? We saw people mobilize. We especially saw young people mobilize. And in my read of history, anytime anything important has actually gotten done, it's been because young people have gotten involved, right? Civil rights, LGBTQ plus rights, environmental action. We are able to get things done when young people get involved and get engaged, and we are seeing that right now. And we're not only seeing that in this country, let's be clear. We're seeing it in countries around the world. I'm the ranking member on the Africa subcommittee, so I spend a lot of time in Africa talking to African governments. Their young people are making their voices heard on issues. We're seeing it. We're seeing it in Kenya. We're seeing it in Ghana. We're seeing it in Nigeria. We're seeing it in all of these countries, in Senegal. And I think that what gives me hope is that instead of feeling like, oh, everything is so horrible, I guess I can't do anything about it, what we're seeing in all these different contexts is people saying, oh, everything's so horrible, I have to get involved. And that's what gives me hope. And the charge I have to all of you is that we've got to keep talking about this, and we've got to keep talking about it in a way that brings more people into the coalition. So the number one thing I've seen that moves people, and this is not rocket science, it's human stories, right? So when we're talking about abortion, for instance, I've had more older men come up to me since Dobbs and tell me, I thought I was pro-life, but I had a daughter have an ectopic pregnancy. And I just realized that if these laws were in place, my daughter probably would not be alive right now. That's what we're talking about. We're continuing, we have to continue humanizing this issue and making it really concrete, because when we make it theoretical, we lose people. When we make it about real stories of real people and how it impacts, that's how we build the coalition. That's how we increase support. And my other charge is that we have to remember it's not just about rights, it's also about access. And we can't get so caught up in the idea of codifying rights that we forget that we also need to do the really hard work of making sure that there's access, even in places where there are still rights. I mean, I live in California, I represent California. There are places in California it's really hard to get an abortion, even though technically it's legal, because the closest clinic is still a 5-hour drive away. You know, there are parts of California that are further away from an abortion clinic than Arizona, because, you know, parts of Arizona are closer to major metropolitan areas of California. So, like, not letting us get, we've got to codify the rights, let's be clear. But that is the start. That's not the finish. And that's what we got to keep working on.
Completely agree. You know, we've got, we work with so many organizations around the world, in addition to, of course, our own advocacy here in the US. And we celebrate and we recognize the policy wins. We recognize when there are legal wins that protect rights, but rights do no good. Words on paper do no good if people don't know their rights and are able to achieve what they want to achieve and have access to what is fundamental to them. So completely agree. These things go hand in hand and our work isn't done. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Jacobs, for all that you do. It's clear that our collective advocacy, activism, and engagement are more important than ever before as we push forward together. You've reinforced that we can and we will create a future where sexual and reproductive health and rights are non-negotiable, and they're recognized as central to the progress of all people. And I want to thank all of you for your commitment, for your passion, your partnership with PAI and with each other. Let's continue this work inspired by so many incredible leaders, Congresswoman Lee, who we recognize tonight, Congresswoman Jacobs, Innocent Grant, who's from Tanzania. I hope that both of you will get to visit. He's a youth advocate and leads a youth-led, youth-focused nonprofit in Tanzania. That's an important partner to PAI. And also all of the champions of choice and rights who are here tonight. So a round of applause for Congresswoman Jacobs.
Thank you. Thank you seriously for everything you all do. I really appreciate it.
And please join us. We have hors d'oeuvres and drinks and each other. Let's keep the conversation going and see how we're going to continue to step up. Thank you, everyone.